I'm Jennifer, and today Katie and I are being joined by our new colleague Patrick, who has a background in all things China, language, history, politics. And for that reason, we are celebrating May as Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. So the audiobooks we're going to talk about today are going to be written by Asian American or Pacific Islander authors and probably deal with some topics with Asian American culture. Okay, so my first book that I read this month, or for this month, was The Heart Principle by Helen Hoang. It's a 2021 book, and it's the third book in this trio of romances by Hoang, who's a Vietnamese American author, who's also a neurodiverse author, an author with autism. So she brings a really interesting perspective to her books. This book features the cousin of the previous hero, so Quan Deep, who is, he looks like your quintessential bad boy with the tattoos and the motorcycle, but he's also really pretty sensitive and what's the word I want to use? He's probably kind of with it when it comes to male-female relationships in that it's not stereotypical. He's recovering from cancer, so he's been off the dating scene for a while. But he meets up through a dating app with Anna's son. Now, Anna is a violinist who became famous on YouTube, but she's stuck right now. Somebody has composed this really interesting piece of music for her, but every time she practices it, she'll stumble, she'll make a mistake, the pacing wasn't right, whatever, and she can't go on. She goes back to the beginning and practices over and over. And she just gets into this rut where she can't move past it, and she's just very frustrated at this point in her life. She's also frustrated because her boyfriend / fiance has announced he wants to have an open relationship. Ooh. And she's like, well, okay, I don't know what that means. So I guess she decides after talking to her friends that, well, if he's interested in dating around before they actually settle down, maybe she should have a one-night stand. So that's why she's on this dating app and meets Quan. The setup just sounds like it's going to be problematic, but it ends up not being that way. Because even though the two meet up for a date, Quan and Anna, nothing really happens. Because Anna kind of freaks out and she's like, okay, I can't do this. I'm sorry, I leave. He texts her. He's like, are you okay? And they build a friendship, first of all, over texting. And only gradually then have a relationship. In the meantime, Anna's also struggling with her mental health. She's seeing a therapist, and the therapist at one point says, have you ever considered that maybe you have autism? And this just kind of opens up a whole new world for her. She's also struggling with her family's expectations because her father ends up having a stroke and she's the youngest daughter, so it's just expected she'll go and take care of him. The book is really part romance, part coming to know yourself, part family struggles. And it's not a light and frothy kind of romance. There's a lot of heavy stuff in it, but I really feel like the author covered things really well. I mean, it's just heart-wrenching at points, but it's beautifully done. And the audiobook is read by Natalie Naudus, who reads Anna's part, and Brian Nishi, who reads Quan's part. It's about 9.5 hours long, but it's just, reading it in paper, it was one of my favorite books last year, and then listening to it on audio got me all over again. Mm. Yeah, it was really, really beautifully done. Funny in parts just makes you want to sob, but overall, a really good book.
It sounds lovely.
That does sound good.
Yeah.
Well, one of the books that I read is Last Night at the Telegraph Club. It recently won one of the big awards from ALA, so it's been getting, a lot of reads. And so I listened to the audiobook. The author is Malinda Lo, and it is narrated by Emily Wu Zeller. It's actually about 12 hours, and our main character is a Chinese American. It takes place in 1950s San Francisco, and if you know your history, that's kind of like right in the middle of the Red Scare. And so our main character is Lily, and her family has a lot of expectations that they have regarding, femininity and how she's supposed to kind of behave, especially in public and at school. And so even though she's expected to be feminine, her dream is actually to go to outer space. And she has a lovely aunt who is one of the female computers. If you've seen Hidden Figures, they were the computers, the mathematicians who helped figure that out. So she's kind of got that connection, but her parents think that it's silly that a girl would love math and would love this idea of going into outer space. And so she's kind of already feeling this bit of a disconnect. And then she one day bumps into a classmate named Kath, who kind of has a reputation for being like a bad girl. And when they physically bump into each other, and Lily's book bag pops open, and out falls a photograph taken from the newspaper of Tommy Andrews, who is what we would call in modern terms a drag king. So a female singer who impersonates men and performs on stage, and Tommy Andrews actually performs locally at the Telegraph Club. So Kath recognizes this image and goes, well, I've actually met Tommy. And so they kind of become friends at school, even though her friends think Kath is like the weird girl, and some feelings start to develop. And then Kath actually takes her to the Telegraph Club, not only to see Tommy, but just kind of to give her that experience. And at that point, Lily discovers this whole new world and community where women are actually allowed to love women and be themselves, and they don't have to only wear dresses and high heels. And of course, she meets Tommy, who is quite the character. And but this whole time, though, she's the only Asian in the room, whether that's at the Telegraph Club or really even at school. And so there's a lot of her thoughts about where she fits in with everybody. And, like I said, the Red Scare is going on. So there's been, unfounded fear from, some people in the community about Chinese Americans. And so she feels like she has to be even extra careful, as her feelings towards Kath develop. But their relationship is so soft and tender and incredibly well written. It definitely is what it would be like for two teenagers that were still kind of figuring themselves out, if that makes sense. And so that's all I'm probably going to say, because I don't want to give away any spoilers. There is, as the title suggests, at one point, last night at the Telegraph Club. So something does happen. And so you will just have to read or listen to it to find out what happens and how Kath and Lily's relationship changes after that last night at the Telegraph Club, and kind of what happens with her life. But I thought it was, just a nice little sapphic romance, but also historical fiction look at 1950s San Francisco.
Sounds like a good one.
Yeah, I like getting more information about that book. 'Cause I've heard so many good things about it, but you get just a quick summary, and you're like, okay, maybe I'll like this, maybe I won't, but something like that where you get more of the details. All right, now sign me up for that book.
Yeah.
And dealing with the dealing with the Red Scare and the Lavender Scare at the same time.
Yes,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah, that's an interesting time period to look at.
Yeah. So how about you, Patrick?
Yeah, so I read or listened to Land of Big Numbers by Bing Chen. And now she's a Chinese-American journalist working out of Philadelphia, and this is her first book. It's a collection of 10 short stories, most of which take place in China or seek to kind of explain the current moment in Chinese society. So it explores themes like censorship, bureaucracy, and control, but also more universal things like satisfaction, love, family, ambition, and there's plenty of nuance throughout. It's aimed at giving like a more complete, holistic picture of what it's like to be Chinese. So the first story is called Lulu. It follows the story of a girl and her twin brother as they grow in age. She shows promise in school and makes her family proud, while they kind of look down on her brother because he's less ambitious. He likes to play video games, and he works as a cook. But when Lulu leaves for college, she starts getting into the darker side of the internet. She shares a lot of videos, stories of protests, strikes, social unrest, and eventually this leads to some run-ins with the police. Meanwhile, her brother continues working as a cook, and he does go to college, but he spends most of his time there playing video games. He does eventually get into esports, and he starts winning some competitions. Meanwhile, Lulu keeps sharing. She goes to jail. She has a lot of difficulties in her life, and so this story it really deals with the family's expectations of their kids, how they shift, and how they're interacting with the Chinese Communist Party and just life in China today. Another story is called The Flying Machine. It follows a farmer who has a knack for building. He likes to he puts together a noodle cutting machine, and he really wants to be a member of the Chinese Communist Party. He really wants membership. That's the way to find recognition in Chinese society today. So he thinks his way to impress his way into the party is by building an airplane. So he tries to do that. And so the story follows his loving relationship with his wife, his friendships in the village, and the airplane he's determined to build from scratch into a functional flying machine. And another story, Gubeko's Spirit, covers a group of citizens who are stuck in a subway station due to a bureaucratic error. And they're stuck there for months.
Oh gosh.
Oh boy.
Yeah, so the story covers their attempts at escape, their life there, and just their process of adjusting to their bizarre new lives, as well as the national media picks up their story and celebrates their resilience, even though they're just stuck. There's no reason they're stuck in there. It's just a mistake.
So I'm sensing some satire.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
One thing she's talked about in some interviews is how the party is a character in the book. Sometimes it's good, like in the story Hotline Girl, where it's dedicated to like solving people's issues, and they do so really very quickly. but in others it's incompetent, like in this story of the subway station, or even a bit more nefarious, like in Lulu. So it's not all set in China, though. It draws from a wide variety of Chinese experiences in China and abroad. So one of the stories is called "Beautiful Country," and it follows a woman living in Arizona who's been in a relationship for 8 years. Her boyfriend is cheated, but otherwise things are good. Her coworkers tell her she has things good, but she doesn't believe it. She's just not quite satisfied. And the name of that story comes from the Chinese word for America, which is Meiguo, which means beautiful country. So it's a nicely written story. And dissatisfaction is a big theme throughout the book. Most of the stories have a sense of hope in them, but they're just never quite resolved in a satisfying way, which gives you a really interesting sense of things. Kind of feels kind of melancholic, but also like not that bad, kind of content. And overall, it gives a good sense of life in China. Very complex, lots of opportunities, lots of hurdles. And the audiobook was good because I'm learning Chinese, and so it's nice to hear some of the, when the Chinese language does come into it, it's nice to hear the correct pronunciation. And there's also some singing and at points. And it's a very, very nicely done audiobook.
Yeah, I think it's always nice to be able to listen to audiobooks that do include language from another country so that you can hear. Maybe you can't always pick out what the words are, especially if you don't have the book right next to you to compare them.
Yeah.
But just to be able to get a feel for how the language sounds in general, I think it's really cool. Yeah. And there are several different narrators. There's one for every story, so it gives you kind of a good. That's fun.
Yeah, it gives you a good. I don't know. It feels like you're more. It gives a level of immersion, I guess.
Yeah. Feels more like real people talking.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I do have another book, and it is called "Sunny Song Will Never Be Famous." It's written by Suzanne Park, who is a Korean American. And it came out also last year. The audiobook is narrated by Joy Osmansky, and it's about 8 hours long. This one is a YA book in which Sunny Song, our title character, is in high school, and she's trying to be a social media influencer. And she's got her YouTube channel and all these other things. And she spends a lot of time on her social media. And she gets called to the carpet by her principal, who's like, look, you need to not spend so much time on this. We need you to be a little more well-rounded as a person. And she is in a private school, so the pressure's on a little more than normal. But then she, for the beginning of, I don't know if it's very beginning of summer or right at the end of classes. I think it's right at the end of classes. She decides she's going to do a cooking live stream on her YouTube channel and show people how to make brownies. And it goes okay. And she goes to end it. And she thinks she's ended it, but she hasn't.
Oh no.
And she's trying to clean herself up. And let's just say it didn't turn out well. It was a little more revealing than she wanted it to be. And so Browniegate explodes. And, she gets a lot more people on the channel because, hey, this is really interesting. But
not for the right reasons.
The principal's not amused. Her parents are not amused. And she basically has one last chance to be able to stay at this school. the principal works it out that if she will go to this farm somewhere in the Midwest and take this digital detox camp, she'll be allowed to continue at the school. But if not, she's out. Now, she's in California, and so the idea of leaving all her friends behind and going off to some organic farm in God knows who in the Midwest, goodness knows where, she's not impressed. And she's really not impressed that she has to leave all of her media behind. Yeah. She has to leave her phone with the folks there at the camp. And she's like, really? You expect me to be offline all summer when I'm trying to hit 100,000 subscribers on my YouTube channel? And oh, by the way, my friends nominated me for this contest. And yeah, it's not pretty. Especially since, there are all these other kids there who are kind of in the same boat and don't really have much to their lives aside from their digital presence. And of course, there's a mean girl, and camp is an interesting experience. And I won't go into it too much, but the book is delightfully awkward. I mean, seriously awkward and very funny at times, but it's also really interesting to read it from an adult perspective because, we adults are on social media a lot too. And how does that impact our lives? And how do we find a better balance with, if it's school or work and our friends and our families, and then social media as well. It raised a lot of interesting issues in a real fun way. So
good for anyone of any age, really. Yeah.
I think so, yeah. I mean, it's very teen oriented. You've got your teen, all the cool things.
Yeah.
The idea of memes and influencing. And I know that's not limited to teens, but still, how it drives teen culture. There's a little bit of romance in it. And so, again, awkward high school romance, that whole thing. But there's definitely some stuff that adults can take away from it too. I would recommend.
Well, I also listened to a book that was set in modern day. It's My Sweet Girl by Amanda Jayatissa. It is narrated by Deepa Samuel. It's about 11 hours, and it is about Paloma. She's adopted from a Sri Lankan orphanage, and the author also happens to be Sri Lankan American. And so Paloma gets adopted by very wealthy, Caucasian, good-meaning parents when she's 14. And they give her the best of everything: school, money, clothes, and so on. And it goes back and forth, the book itself, between young Paloma when she's at the orphanage as she's meeting the people who become her parents, and current Paloma, who's in her 30s and has just financially been cut off by her parents. And we don't know why she's been cut off by her parents, but she's currently living in this crappy apartment that she can barely afford. So she decides to kind of under the table rent one of the rooms to an Indian who's just come to America. His name is Arun, and so no paper trail. That's important. So one day Arun is being kind of a nosy Nancy, and he's going through her stuff, and he finds a secret. And as the reader, you don't know what this secret is just yet, but you know that he has decided to blackmail her and is demanding all this money. So she's, of course, very upset. She sends lots of angry, I hate you, I hope you die kind of texts to him. Also important. And she goes to the bank. I want him out of my life is essentially what she's thinking. So she goes to the bank to get what little money she has left. And when she comes back, Arun is dead, bloody and dead at the kitchen table. And then at the same time, she sees Lahini. So Lahini is a Sri Lankan ghost story, kind of like our boogeyman. And I've looked her up, and she kind of looks like the girl from The Ring, like the long black hair and very scary and pointy teeth. And so she's terrified of Lahini, so much so, and the fact that her roommate is dead, that she like has an anxiety attack and passes out in the hallway. Like, so she gets out of the room, passes out, comes to when the neighbors are like, "What are you doing? Are you drunk? Get up!" And it's like, "Oh my gosh, my roommate is dead." Calls the cops. The cops arrive. Now it's been like 10 hours because she was unconscious that whole time. The cops show up. Arun is not there. There is nothing in the apartment that even suggests that someone lived there with her. There's no blood, no sign of a struggle. So a very unreliable narrator is what I will say. So this whole idea of, is she having major psychological issues? You do find out that when she first arrived in America, Lahini was kind of stalking her back then, and her parents had to have her go and meet with counselors all the time, and she thought she was finally done with seeing Lahini. So is this something supernatural that's actually going on? Has she lost her marbles? Or is there some sort of deep, insidious thing that's going on? And so the police, after all this happened, are like, well, we're going to investigate, but maybe you should go someplace safe because this is potentially a crime scene. They kind of believe her. So she goes to her parents' house. They're out of town. But again, we keep seeing Lahini. The neighbors are acting weird. Maybe she has a stalker. And so it was just a wild, twisty, like, I had never read a book like this before, like, totally unpredictable. It was fabulous. And I learned a lot about Sri Lankan, at least mythology, with Lahini. And so it was very interesting.
Wow. I haven't heard of that book at all, so that sounds like one to try and find.
Sounds exciting.
My goodness. Wow, so some really good books there. Nothing like adding to your TBR list.
Yeah.
A lot to go through. Yeah.
Definitely.
Thanks for joining us.
Bye-bye.